Hello and welcome to our third episode of the Symphonic podcast. My name is Bernardo Miethe, and with me as always is Andrew Owen.
Hello.
Today we are going to be talking about Korsakov, the Five, and his composition Scheherazade. Really quick before we start, so the Five, we're going to talk about the Five, and then later if we do another episode on a Russian composer who was in the Five, then you can just refer to this.
Yes.
This episode will bring you back here so you can learn about that, and we don't have to say things twice. Great. Okay. So
We'll get into the five in a bit.
So Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, did I say it right?
You did.
Oh.
Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov.
Nice.
Isn't that delightful? I probably pronounced it wrong too.
Okay.
Russian's tough.
Yes. So he was born in 1844 and he died in 1908. He believed in developing a nationalistic classical music style, but a Russian nationalistic, obviously. He used Russian folk songs and exotic harmonies and rhythms, known as musical Orientalism, which we kind of talked a little bit about in our last episode, but we're going to get a little more into today. He did appreciate Western music, and he was a master orchestrator, and he taught harmony and orchestration at the St. Petersburg Conservatory. But this was thanks to a rigorous self-education that he undertook, and he was also a Russian Navy. He was part of the Russian Navy, which he joined at age 12.
The Rimsky-Korsakov, like many of the composers in the Russian Five, the Mighty Handful, their day jobs were not usually music.
Yeah.
Korsakov was one of the few who did have music as his day job. Everyone else,
Keep going, I'm sorry.
everybody like Alexander Borodin was a chemist. Huey was a music critic. I mean, a lot of these people were not. They did their best to stay away from Western harmony as much as they could, so that they could try and cultivate a Russian sound specifically.
So he looks like a naval officer.
He does.
He does. He's like
Sort of.
his big beard and
He's the one who looks the most like Sousa, right?
yeah. And if you've seen the Titanic and the captain of the Titanic is like the same person.
Those glasses need to come back, man.
So while he was in the Navy, he took some piano lessons and he attended operas and orchestral concerts. And this love for the sea also influenced his compositions, such as his Opus 5, which is a symphonic poem called Sadko, and of course Scheherazade, which we'll talk about. At HNT, he was age 18. He was introduced to Balakirov, who in turn introduced him to Kui and Mussorgsky. At this time, Balakirov convinced Korsakov to compose despite his lack of formal training. And while he was on I think it was a 3-year sea trip to England, the US, and Brazil, he wrote his first symphony. And then when he went back to Russia, he met the final five, which was Borodin.
Yeah, he met the last person out of the mighty handful.
So his first compositions that Korsakov wrote were written by intuition alone, and because his music knowledge was really elemental, and he consulted Tchaikovsky, who was who had received a rigorous academic training, and who encouraged him to actually study more formal music. And while Korsakov was teaching the conservatory at age 27,
Which is my age.
mine too. He also studied from textbooks and stayed one step ahead of his students. So basically, before he would teach, he would get ahead of them so he could teach what he was about to. I mean, it's really impressive.
Welcome to life. Who hasn't done that at least once?
Aren't we doing that right now? We kind of cramped yesterday, and now
Never.
we're here.
No, never.
So he would for his self study he would have a follow a strict regimen of composing counterpoint, fugues, chorales, and others. He taught at this conservatory for over a decade. Uh, at age 29, he became the inspector of the naval bands, and his job was just to visit across Russia to supervise the conductors and the programming and basically to check their instruments. In 1884, this position got abolished and he lost his job, but after that, he worked under Balakirov as deputy of the court chapel. And this allowed Korsakov to learn about Russian Orthodox music, which is really important to the five. Um, so this new and learned Korsakov wasn't received well by other Russian nationalists because they thought that he was basically abandoning his Russian roots, and as a result, Korsakov transcribed 40 Russian songs after this, and then he for voice and piano, and then he did another 100. And this also gave him a lot of material for him to draw upon in his later works.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. In 1889, Korsakov heard Wagner's Ring, and he was really amazed by it. He really loved it at that time. Before this, the five, which we'll talk about it, ignored Wagner's music. As we know, Wagner devoted his life to compose big operas. That's what he's obviously known for. And after Korsakov heard The Ring, he devoted his career to composing operas after that. But he did change his mind about Wagner, and he started criticizing Wagner like 3 years later. Nice.
Sure.
So, also another thing we have to mention is that Korsakov didn't like Debussy's music. He said that it was poor and skimpy to the 9th degree, I think. To the nth degree.
To the nth
degree. There is no technique, even less imagination. This is really strange for me because both Debussy and Korsakov have a lot of, overlapping ideas. In my opinion, they have the pentatonic
they use
scales,
pentatonic, use whole tone.
and draw on other similar aspects.
Mm-hmm.
In 1892, Korsakov was diagnosed with
Neurasthenia.
Thank you. Perfect. A condition with symptoms of fatigue, anxiety, headache, heart palpitations, high blood pressure, and a depressed mood. And around this same time, he had his wife was sick, his mother, youngest child, and second youngest child all died. And also the death of Tchaikovsky that same year prompted him to write the opera Christmas Eve, which is based on a story by Nikolai Gogol, which Tchaikovsky had based his opera Vakula the Smith.
Tchaikovsky wrote all these operas that I've never heard.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous. I mean, I've sung Tchaikovsky's operas before. I've done all these things. I've studied Iolanta for my disability studies class. Mm-hmm. But I have yet to encounter Vakula the Smith or even Christmas Eve. I don't know either of these were.
I do know about Christmas Eve. That's a work performed. I think there's a suite for orchestra, which is regular performed at Christmas by some orchestras.
It's gotta be with a name like that.
Of course. So this opera, the Christmas Eve opera by Korsakov, was really successful and it was well received. And so after this, his next 15 years are spent writing operas. And in these 15 years, he wrote 11 operas. Another thing to mention is that Korsakov wrote a book on orchestration and one on harmony. And he's also thought as a transitional figure between the unlearned and the studious Russian school, because obviously the five began composing nationalistic music intuitively, and then Korsakov is the one that starts that way, but then studies and learns, and then after Korsakov, all Russian composers are formally trained.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's the guy in the middle between Russian nationalism, between just trying to devoid yourself of knowledge so that you can just be Russian and void yourself of Western thinking and try to be only Russian. And then you have Korsakov who says, no, I mean I can learn every bit of that and still be as Russian as the next guy.
Mm-hmm.
course, the other. Four probably disagree.
They didn't like that. We'll talk about that as well. Korsakov's compositional techniques, and these overlap a lot with the five. We're probably going to touch on two things at the same time. Korsakov's compositional techniques, obviously Russian folk tunes, whole tone scales, octatonic scales, pentatonic scales, which were thought of as primitive or Eastern, and by Eastern we mean Middle East or Asia, which is also a part of Orientalism, which we talked about basically in the last episode. And if you want to learn more about whole tone, octatonic, and pentatonic scales, I guess you can go back. Basically, what they mean by octatonic and pentatonic is just a scale that has different length of
well, it's just different pitch collections.
Pitch collections, thank you.
So you have, like, the pentatonic scale just has, like on a piano, just the black notes. Mm-hmm. Octatonic scale alternates half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. So it creates this this really diminished, sort of dark sounding.
Also known as the diminished scale.
Right. It's literally just a fully diminished chord and then another fully diminished chord a half step up at the same time in a scale. Mm-hmm. It's a sort of a dark, very, to me, a Russian sounding scale.
Nice.
Even I don't know if that is original to Russian music. I don't think it is.
But it's been
it's sort of
established.
It's become that part of it.
And the whole tone scale is basically a very how do you say? Evenly divided. So thank you so much.
Every single note in the octave is split. It's just you go up a step, 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 whole tones. Mm-hmm. So you have la da da da, la da 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 da. I shouldn't cuss. Cut that out.
We'll beep it up.
Da 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 da. There you go. See, it's so hard to do because you can't. I mean, it's
so weird.
It's not natural to the voice. It's not natural to music. Mm-hmm. To musical thinking, not in the overtone series or anything like that.
Some more of his compositional techniques. He was always experimenting in terms of orchestration, but these were controlled experiments. I mean, he didn't go as far as completely making a new sound for the orchestra, but he did some new experiments which I think pay off. His harmonies became more and more radical as he matured as a composer. To say that the whole tones and octatonic scales were viewed as radical by Western tradition, they were just not used, except for the French later in the 19th century, which we talked about last week. Of course, we have to talk also about his students. His most notorious students are Glazunov, Stravinsky, Prokofiev, and Respighi, which hopefully we'll get to in this podcast soon.
Sure.
Anything else you want to say about Korsakov?
Well, not much to say other than that for now, I think.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about the Mighty Five, or the Mighty Handful, or the Great Five, or the Five, or whatever. Mm-hmm. They were a circle of Russian composers who started all in their 20s when they started gathering, and they basically discussed trends in music, and their goal was to produce a new Russian kind of art music rather than just imitating Europeans. Their members were, and you can help me with their pronunciations.
Well, they're ridiculous. I mean, they're ridiculous for us poor English speakers. We have trouble with these Russian names. But the first one, the leader, Mili Balakirev. The second one, Cesar Cui.
Something like
and then there's, in English we say Modest Mussorgsky, but in Russian I think it's more like Modest Mussorgsky. And then of course Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. And the last one, the chemist Alexander Baradin. Baradin. Or in English we just say Alexander Borodin. It's easier to say. Those are the composers of the Magucheya Kuchka, or whatever they call the nice. mighty handful.
So they let's talk about some of the things that they talked about, or the composers that they liked and disliked. Composers like Bach were thought as mathematical and unfeeling. Mozart was naive, but Mendelssohn and Berlioz were highly esteemed. And we talked about Mendelssohn in our first episode. We haven't gotten to Berlioz yet, but we will.
I feel like we will. With a name like the Symphonic podcast, we're probably going to cover his Symphonie Fantastique
For
at
sure.
some point.
For sure. In May 1867, the critic Vladimir Stasov, he wrote an article on a concert giving for visiting Slav delegations to the All Russian Ethnographical Exhibition in Moscow. Wow, it's a lot.
The All Russian Ethnographical Exhibition. Say that 5 times.
It's like it's too much for my tongue. I can't control it. The four Russian composers whose works were played at these concerts were Glinka, Dargominsky.
That's a tough one. Dargominsky.
Thank you. Balakirev and Korsakov. And the article ended with the following statement. God, can you read that, please?
Sure. God grant that our Slav guests may never forget today's concert. God grant that they may forever preserve the memory of how much poetry, feeling, talent, and intelligence are possessed by the small but already mighty handful of Russian musicians.
There it is.
That is Stasov.
So this expression, the mighty handful, was mocked by enemies of Balakirev and Stasov. Academic writers of the conservatory, basically the Russian Music Society, well, that's who were against, I guess, the Balakirev and stuff.
People who criticized
Exactly.
this mighty handful, this expression, mighty handful.
And so the mighty handful defiantly adopted this name, and
It tends to happen, right?
yeah, and then I mean what I read was this loose collection of composers gathered around Balakirev, which now included Kui, Mussorgsky, and Korsakov and Borodin, and who are the five associated with it. Rimsky-Korsakov refers to the mighty handful as Balakirev's circle, and occasionally he also used mighty handful, but he liked more Balakirev's circle because Balakirev was the leader. The five were critical of Tchaikovsky's music because he was classically trained, and that was what they were completely against. But on the other hand, Korsakov had a personal friendship with Tchaikovsky, with which expanded 20 years. And like we talked in the beginning, basically Tchaikovsky told Korsakov to go study more and get more familiarized with actual formal music training, and they became really good friends. But not the other four.
Right. I mean, he was the bridge. He was there to be sort of the best of both worlds as best as he could be.
Yeah.
Not to shut the door on any tradition.
Also, Korsakov, who was the one that was trained formally, he edited the works of the other four, and much controversy has come from this because basically the five wanted to be original, and Korsakov is accused of taking this away with his training. One thing though is that Korsakov's arrangement of Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain is the one that is more frequently performed. But nowadays, all other revisions by Korsakov have been replaced with Mussorgsky's originals.
Sure. I mean, Korsakov was a brilliant orchestrator. He's a person he didn't fix the works, but he made them. I think he made them usually much better.
We're gonna talk about the style of the five, which obviously are going to match those of Korsakov we talked a little bit before. Obviously, Russian folk songs, music from Russian villages, church chants, and tolling of the bells. Which this tolling of the bells almost became cliche to the five because they used it so much. And one of the ones that comes to mind right now is obviously the ending of Night on Bald Mountain, where everything's calm and you hear the bell. Bing, bing.
Or there's the one thing that came to my head, to the exclusion of pretty much everything else, immediately was the coronation scene from Boris Godunov by Mussorgsky. It's just nothing but bells, and there's just clamor everywhere for the coronation of this guy.
Also, tonal center constantly is moving, is basically elusive. There is no logical progression of harmony because they weren't trained. And what we mean by that is tonal center is where used for those of you that are not musicians. Even if you're not musicians, you still recognize this. We are always trained to hear, resolution. I mean, in pop music, there is 1-5-1 or 1-4-5-1.
We feel home. We
Exactly.
know that there is a home base somewhere in music. Da 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 da. And naturally, you want to finish that with da. But everybody who has heard music, at least in the Western tradition, just has that innate in them. And so what he does here is they move that tonal center frequently.
Yeah, it's moved.
So home changes. Poor nomads.
And also melodies are also in constant flux, and there's also a lot of variations to melodies. And I mean, for those of you that are not trained, what we mean by variations is that one melody is just changed a little bit here and there. It still sounds like the melody, but it just has different, I guess, added extra flares. Also, I love this. They used a lot of parallel fifths, fourths, and thirds, which are no-nos in Western tradition. These are supposed to be completely wrong.
And for non-musicians, the idea of a parallel fifth, in writing for voices, writing for like 4 voices, if you're writing a hymn or something, you're always supposed to make sure that the interval of, especially the fifth, as a fifth, 1-5-1. You're supposed to never have those 2 voices and a fifth moving parallel with each other on the next note, because it's hard to hear and it sounds awkward and sort of, it's, I don't know, like drinking your own blood. It just has this unfortunate, weird taste in your mouth, But no, the Russian composers are able to use it pretty healthily because they develop that expectation of that. Just like you hear old Gregorian chant and an organum voice, where we have 2 people singing a chant a fifth away from each other. When you have that as the expectation, it sounds perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But if it's a Bach chorale, it's going to sound wrong. It's going to hurt when you try to sing it. That's not right.
Yeah.
But yeah, they frequently use parallel intervals, parallel fifths, especially in their music, without thinking too much about why it was bad or it just sounded fun. Just another technique.
This is another point. Is also they were against Debussy, or against the Impressionistic, who did exactly the same thing. Yeah, parallel motion everywhere.
The MO of Impressionist composers.
Also. We're going to, I'll put a graph about this because it's a little more complicated. What's called the Russian submediant, which is a root position tonic triad followed by a root position augmented tonic triad followed by a first inversion submediant minor triad. And a famous example is the Russian submediant occurs in the very opening of bars of the 3rd movement of Scheherazade, which you will also hear in this episode. That's a little more complicated.
That's pretty complicated.
It's complicated, but I'll put a graph and hopefully that'll help the musicians more than the non-musicians.
Probably so, yeah.
And let's talk about Orientalism. We touched a little bit about it last week, this became widely considered in the West as one of the best known aspects of Russian music, and a trait of the Russian national character. And the leader of the 5, Balakirev, encouraged the use of Eastern themes and harmonies to set the Russian music apart from the German. Orientalism was not confined to using authentic Eastern melodies. What became more important than the melodies themselves were the musical conventions added to them. These conventions allowed Orientalism to could become an avenue for writing music on subjects considered unmentionable otherwise, such as political themes and erotic fantasies. Um, and Scheherazade has that. We're about to talk about that. It draws from the Middle Eastern tradition. Um, Anything else?
Oh, that's good.
Cool. So let's talk about Scheherazade. First, we're going to talk about the story before we talk about the music. This is a programmatic composition, and this is also important because they admire Berlioz, and we will get to Berlioz later, but his most important composition, like we mentioned, is Symphony Fantastique, who follows a very specific story, and the music is trying to really depict exactly what's happening in the music, and Scheherazade also does this. It evokes clear mental imagery of the music.
Right.
This work was collected over many centuries by authors, translators, and scholars across West, Central, South Asia, North Africa.
I mean, the work on which Scheherazade is
Thank
derived.
You. Thank you so much. Yes.
The work itself is called 1001 Arabian
course.
Nights, is the common name for this thing.
Thank you for clarifying. You can.
Well, sure. I mean, the work itself, as Bernardo says, is collected in the Arabic language from many different countries. A very, very old work. And the name of this particular piece, this tone poem, this multi-movement symphonic poem, is the Scheherazade. That is the name of the daughter of an important character in this work, who is sort of the storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
The 1001 Arabian Nights is sort of the Canterbury Tales of the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Canterbury Tales is just a collection of stories with a really simple unifying element, which is why the stories are being told.
Yeah.
That's how it goes with this. So with 1001 Arabian Nights, you have a Persian king who he finds out that his brother's wife has been unfaithful, and then he finds out that his wife has also been unfaithful. And so he's decided that there are no faithful women out there, so in order to get any degree of marital bliss, he figures out that his best way to manage things is just to have a virgin every night, and every morning have her executed.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, before she has a chance to be unfaithful, he just has one night with the virgin and executes her the next night. This goes on for a while. He has a staff person there who provides a new virgin, finds a virgin, brings her on, brings her there to have a lovely night of marital bliss and be executed every day. And that works out for a while, and as they're running out, he's worried, this staff person, so the staff person's daughter, Scheherazade, offers to go in herself, and he reluctantly agrees, and okay, she goes in there, and when she sits down to tell the stories, when she sits down at the night with this Persian king, she starts telling a story, and doesn't finish the story that night, which you can't execute her the next day because you got to hear the rest of the story.
Yeah, he's intrigued. He wants to know exactly.
He wants to know what happens next. So she does this. She tells the story and it doesn't finish the story. And every night, I'll tell the rest of the story tomorrow night. Yeah. And then so he waits and he hears the next part of the story.
Smart.
And so this goes on for 1001 nights, which, if you think about it, it's a really long time to be telling a story.
Yeah, if 365 is 1 year, it's a lot of years.
That's about almost like 3, right?
3, 4. 3 years, yeah.
I mean, that's plenty of just keeping a story going and having different tales of different sources and everything. So yeah, that's the unifying element of all of these stories, is the way it's being told.
And by the time that, so by the end of the 1001 Nights, by then they've had 3 sons, and I mean by that time, the Sultan has become a kinder person, and he's already in love with her, so he spares his life and makes her the queen. So some of the stories which are not actually in the music, but are some of the 1001 stories, or which vary depending on the collection, are the Aladdin's Wonderful Lamp, which we all know, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, the 7 voyages
Seven Voyages,
Voyages.
of Sinbad the
Oh
Sailor.
man,
Voyages.
Voyages. Oh my god. Oh, Sinbad the Sailor. Um, and these are all Middle Eastern folk tales, uh, which were not part of the Nights in the Arabic version, but were added into the collection by Anthony Gallard and other European translators. Um, so we're going to get a little more about the music now. Korsakov uses two main themes throughout the piece. He uses the Sultan theme, which is usually played by the lower the lower parts, which would be the basses, cellos, or trombones. And this is a very, I guess, marcato and low, assertive. It sounds almost angry when you hear it. Counter to that, we have Scheherazade's theme, which is high, which is played by the violin. It's high, legato, and it just sounds more kind, just by the nature of it. What we mean by legato in music is that all notes are connected, or they are connected as much as possible, because it's sometimes impossible to do. If your bow is only as long as, I mean, it's not that long, but so you have some restrictions, but still, I mean, violinists trained enough so that they can mask it a little bit.
That's right.
And I mean, obviously, I play flute, so that's also a problem. We run out of air, so it can't be completely legato. A long phrase can be legato, but there's some ways around it. So that's what legato is, and that's what Scheherazade's theme is. And Scheherazade's theme, if I remember correctly, is an E minor. It's just an E minor scale, natural minor scale. But he just plays with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just like that.
And you will hear it.
Mm-hmm.
You probably are hearing it right now. And also, this is really important. Well, let's get into the first movement. The first movement, like we were talking about before, this is a long symphonic poem.
It's long, yeah. I mean, if performed in its entirety, it should last exactly 1,001 nights. That's not true. It's about 45 minutes. It's a long work.
Realistically, I mean, it's almost like a symphony. It's four movements, which is classic. I mean, you can see Korsakov had been studying, because he uses four movement. He uses a dance movement, a slow movement, a big finale. I mean, it's really.
It's a symphonic. I mean, it's a programmatic symphony more than it is a symphonic poem.
Yeah. So the first movement is the sea and Sinbad's ship. Sinbad, thank you. And as many of you know, the tale of this is this seafaring adventure, meeting strange folks, birds, fish, and other rarities after landing on an island that turns out to be the back of a giant fish. And after the gruff opening sits to the irresistible sweetness of the Scheherazade refrain, softens into the primary theme, which then, together with the fragments and echoes, modulates and arpeggiated strings that conjure the undulations and changing moods of the ocean, built wholly upon repetition of the simplest materials. The movement sustains interest through the wonders of Rimsky-Korsakov's dexterous handling. I got this from classicalnas.net, which has some really good.
It's pretty quick and a nice little explanation of it. It is extremely repetitive, this first movement. It just goes on and with this wonderful sea-like evocation. Wonderful stuff.
And one more thing that I want to point out about that is that it's written in 6/8, I believe, and this is important because a lot of music that represents the sea around this time and after is written in 6/8. We have examples like Korsakov's here in this movement. We have Debussy in La Mer, also in 6/8, and we have Smetana's Moldau, which is part of the larger work Ma Vlast, which is My Father's Land. And the Moldau movement is about a river, and it's also in 6/8, and they all sound a lot alike.
I think there's something to be said for taking, like, I don't know, if you were to put water in a bowl and move it from side to side, then you have one side that has weight and have another side that has weight. It resembles 6/8 to me. You have going to and from, da 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 da. Dun, 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 dun.
Right.
It's very natural, watery time signature.
And on top of that, they also undulate a lot. And we saw that in last week in the beginning of the Daphne and Chloe suite, where he's undulating as well, representing water. I mean, it's
something about 6/8.
Yeah, it's great. The second movement, which is the story of the calendar prince, a fakir. What was a fakir? I forgot.
Fakir, that's a good question.
We just
we just looked
it up and we forgot.
It's weird. Let's see. A fakir, the magic of Wikipedia, we can discover. A fakir is wandering dervishes teaching Islam and living on alms. These are ascetics, Muslim Sufi ascetics, people who devote themselves to the faith very, very devotedly.
So the calendar prince, he's a fakir, and he tells Sinbad his macabre account of being buffeted between visions of veiled women and a monstrous genie. A pastoral theme of sinuous melody and jagged rhythms is torn between lyrical temptation and vigorous threats until transfixed and lulled by a reappearance of the Scheherazade theme. Yeah. Every movement has a reappearance of both characters, of both the Sultan and Scheherazade in some way or another. And like we talked about before, variation, he's using variation in this piece by, especially in the Sultan's theme. He's modifying the Sultan's theme as the piece goes on, representing that he's getting more and more calm, I guess, towards the end. And it's really amazing, especially in the last moment, which we'll get to. Anything else?
That's good.
The third movement, the young prince and the young princesses is the name of the movement. It's another tale told to Sinbad of Abraham who falls in love with a portrait of Gemela. He seeks her out and wins her love when she realizes that her fierce hatred of men was kindled all along by jealousy of his reported goodness. Rimsky fashions a lilting, playful love song extended by shimmering winds and strings scalar rungs. Offset by jaunty, is that right?
Jaunty.
Thank you. Offset by a jaunty up-tempo variant spiced by gentle percussion, mostly the triangle and tambourine, until the Scheherazade theme wistfully unites them. Something I want to say about the triangle and the tambourine, for some reason I just thought about Beethoven. Beethoven's Ninth, where this is okay. First, we have Mozart in the Turkish. Is that the Turkish?
Yeah, I mean, he draws from Turkish stuff all the time. Janissary band is the term people use for that.
And
trying to make it Oriental sounding by introducing those intervals and the triangle.
The triangle. In Beethoven's Nine, Beethoven looks at the Turkish or Middle Eastern tradition with the piccolo solo with the triangle as well, and Korsakov is using this as well. I mean, and I don't think this is a coincidence. Obviously, we know that Korsakov studied.
Sure.
He might not have liked the Western music, but he knew about it, and this is great. Using this as well. The last movement has a really long name. It's called The Festival at Baghdad. The ship goes to pieces on a rock surmounted by a bronze warrior. Conclusion. That's the name of the movement.
It's long. Festival at Baghdad, the ship breaks against a cliff surmounted by a bronze horseman. Is that name?
Conclusion. Yeah. Also, I read that Korsakov later regretted giving such specific names to this music. But I mean, I think that's what he was going for. He wanted to imitate Berlioz, clearly to me. Mm-hmm. And I mean, these great titles give a sense to the program nature of the music.
Right.
So this music, and we're reading again from classicalnotes.net. Can you read it? Because
sure.
I'm getting stuck.
As the compound title suggests, the work ends with an expression of the complex emotions of the second movement as Sinbad returns from his voyages to festivities in Baghdad, yearns for yet more adventure, and heads out to uncharted waters, where he loses his ship in a storm. Yet his life, like the stories of Scheherazade, leads ever onward toward the next adventure, full of the wonder of what is yet to come. Unquote. After depicting the joyous celebration and a rousing storm, the music culminates in a broad restatement of the unadorned main theme, as if to wipe away the Sultan's pretension and leave him to confront himself. Mm-hmm. The exquisite ending belongs to Scheherazade. Having won her victory over the Sultan's cruel power through astute charm and allure, his opening motif slinks into the deep bass while her captivating theme soars higher and finally alights on a barely audible harmonic 2 octaves above the treble staff, drawing us with her toward ever new reaches of infinite imagination.
Mm-hmm. I really like that. And in the music, it's really cool how the first time we hear the Sultan, he's so angry, and the last time we hear the Sultan, he's so calm. It's the same exact kind of music, but it's presented so differently.
Yeah.
It's piano, it's legato, it's just really, really incredible and imaginative. We're gonna put a snippet right now of that. So let me stop for a second and let me hear it so I can remember. What's the name of this?
Scheherazade.
Movement 4. I just want to hear the ending to make sure that, because I think it ends just like Romeo and Juliet. I think.
A little bit of applause at the end there. They must like it or something.
This is a good piece for crowds, dude. People like it. It's hard though. It's a hard piece. As a flute player, winds have a lot of hard passages here. A lot of solos, incredibly hard too.
Yeah.
And if you're a piccolo player, you better start studying this piece right now, because these are audition pieces. If I remember correctly, what is it? Well, it's just fast and hard. Super hard, super fast, super high.
From this work?
Yes.
Ah.
There's a solo piccolo. Well, it's not solo, but it's super prominent. It's really important. Okay, YouTube, don't fail me now.
It's failing you. I'm sorry. Let's see if I can
Maybe yours will work.
might have some more.
So Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet comes 8 years before Korsakov's, and I think that the ending is a lot in the same nature. Using the winds as a choir, almost like an organ, to represent, I guess, ether or I guess sublime, the sublime. Really, really amazing. Is there anything else you want to say about this composer?
Oh no, I think we've covered a lot.
Yeah, we did. It was a good episode. Okay, so concluding, if you have any, if you wanna say anything about this episode, you think we got anything wrong, or anything like that, please email us at symphonicpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you have any questions about anything, we would love to answer them. We have submitted finally our episodes to our podcast to iTunes, and it's being reviewed right now. So as soon as that's good, they'll be on iTunes.
Gotta make the cut.
Yep. And are we good?
I think we are.
All right. For me, Bernardo Miethe, and for Andrew Owen, this has been episode number 3.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to our 3rd episode of the Symphonic.
Doing great. Look, we got 6 words in. I think that's pretty impressive.
That's true. Last episode, it was at least a minute before we screwed up. All right.